Hello. So as part of our user interface design project, I've been tasked with redesigning an aspect of a game's UI, and today I want to showcase to you my UI redesign for the inventory system within Animal Crossing New Horizons. So before I jump into the actual redesign, I want to do a short analysis of Animal Crossing New Horizons, starting with the good aspects of its UI. So the first thing is that Animal Crossing has a very simplistic design that fits extremely well with the more casual and laid-back nature of the game. The second is that Animal Crossing New Horizons has a very good iconography. All the icons in the inventory are very simplistic and are easy to read throughout. And finally, Animal Crossing also has a very strong and consistent theming throughout its presentation, everything from fonts, colors, shapes, everything from a presentational point of view of Animal Crossing is absolutely immaculate. Next, I want to jump on to what I would perceive as the negatives. So, the first one is kind of in spite of the game's core focus, is what I would call oversimplicity. Keeping the details concise where necessary is good, but at some points, Animal Crossing becomes a burden because some of the most trivial tasks are stretched out in the name of this simplicity. The second is a lack of shortcuts. For a game that's about collecting and building, Animal Crossing suffers heavily from a lack of good shortcut actions to help the user navigate its inventory, something that the player will spend a lot of time doing. And to continue on from this, another issue is the lack of effective organizational features. Again, considering the core focus of the game, the last thing the player wants to be doing is constantly inventory juggling and running back and forth between destinations to just store items. All these points, especially the last two, I believe create a massive time sink within Animal Crossing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing as the game is a very relaxed and casual game. But I do believe these issues compound and result in a lot of the gameplay being absorbed by laborious menu scrolling. So with that in mind, I want to discuss some potential solutions. So the first one would be to incorporate better usage of shortcuts, incorporation of shortcuts into the UI that will give the user more options to do specific actions faster. Next, there's already aspects within Animal Crossing that I believe could have similar logic applied to the inventory system to assist with streamlining the experience. For example, somewhere within the inventory system, I believe you could apply the selection wheel that Animal Crossing uses for tool and emotes and rework that into something that helps with the inventory system. Next would be the addition of a quick sort or some kind of other filter functionalities. Games such as Team Fortress 2 feature effective sectioning of items within the game to the specific classes and the areas that they occupy. But in addition to this, there's also a multitude of custom filters and search options to assist the player. However, we must keep in mind that accessibility of such features on PC versus console titles will differ, so this is something that needs to be considered going forward with this idea. So, with this in mind, I've had a basic idea in my head and I've set forward with creating a very rough visual prototype that I can move forward with. Based on the general ideas I put forward, I've made the main goal and the focus of this project to streamline the actions within the inventory system and increase the overall quality of the flow. So here is the UI in action. Simulating Nintendo Joy-Cons, the player can open the menu via the X button. As you can see here, the UI has been overhauled and the inventory now has been broken down in 3 categories: general, clothing, and bells. All of these can be cycled using the ZL and ZR buttons respectively, and within the general and clothing category there's now 5 subcategories. In general there's tools, crafting, plants, wildlife, and decorations. And within clothing there's headwear, tops, bottoms, footwear, and accessories. These can be cycled using L and R respectively. This now means the player has, or the inventory will do some legwork for the player. For example, if they pick up a flower, rather than just occupying the first available slot in the inventory, it will now be automatically sorted into the appropriate category, which in this case would be in the plants category. The bells menu now holds a greater amount and allows the player to directly deposit from this menu. Item interaction generally remains the same, and that consistency has been maintained throughout. However, each item now has a new option known as store item, and the system is being reworked to allow the player to directly access their main storage from the inventory menu via the plus button on their Joy-Con. The storage UI is being reworked to give the player, or to give it more visual consistency between the inventory and storage, with general and clothing items both having their own dedicated storage and both utilizing the same subcategories for maximum consistency. Storage will also tell you your current space for that particular subcategory. And this greatly streamlines the process for inventory management, with the player being able to quickly access and retrieve items. In tandem with the reworked UI and the addition of shortcuts, this reduces the steps necessary to perform trivial tasks greatly and reduces the burden of player management on the player, reducing overall downtime. So now that you've had a chance to see the prototype in action, I'd now like to discuss the development process and break down how it works inside of Figma. So here is an overview of the project, just showing all of the different elements and components. This is all the flows and different diagrams of it, just to give you an overview of how it flows and the overall complexity. This project consists of three main components: the UI screens, the inventory cycles, and items. Here's a closer visual of the main part of the project. This is one of the UI menus. Each menu is broken down into multiple inventories that can be cycled through with either L or R, as mentioned. On the surface, it looks like the player has lost inventory space, but they've actually received a net gain between all the different subcategories. These inventories are categorized to fit specific items, so as mentioned in the previous example, if the player picks up a flower, that will be automatically categorized into the plants section. This is part of the goal to give the player, or this is part of the goal to give the system a quick and effective organizational tools without putting the burden of manual organization on the player. And here's an example of how that system flows and how it cycles through. Next, we have the items. Most of this area was focused on emulating the existing menus for within this game, as this is probably one of the aspects that didn't need much, if any, tweaking. However, all the items now have a new option called store item, allowing for the player to quickly put items into storage without the need for a specific item or being within their home. Here is a placeholder example of how the items and their menus flow. As we're not rebuilding the whole game, some of these options obviously have no functionality, but those relevant to inventory do. Here's some examples of the UI elements that were made for the project. The main goal here was to keep in line with Animal Crossing New Horizons' visual style, as this is probably one of the strongest elements of the game's design, and maintaining that visual simplicity is a core goal of this UI. Aspects such as UI bars, buttons, and entire backgrounds were made from scratch and through repurposing existing game assets, and here are some isolated examples of some of those UI elements. Finally, before I go into feedback, I'd like to show some before and after comparisons. Firstly, a before and after of the main UI inventory. I believe here showcases a great visual conciseness, while still offering the player more options. Next is the storage. The biggest leap here is the fact that we've actually added the ability to access the storage immediately from the menus, and we've incorporated transitions that tie into the visual theme of each section. Here's a before and after of the new storage screens. These storage screens are now split between new subcategories that help separate items, and means it was even possible to create a bit more visual simplicity here that still feels enough like Animal Crossing style to feel the part. After the project was completed, I shared it among family and peers with a good mix of those with minimal experience with Animal Crossing and those with a lot, and had them play around with both Animal Crossing's inventory and the prototype that I created. And here's a summary of that feedback I received. Most were very happy with the increase in inventory size, and the automatic organization introduced through the new system was met with positive reception, and the introduction of quick access to the storage system, as well as being able to transition from from menu to menu at the press of a button, people thought this was very, very good. However, the design of some of the visual elements were met with some criticism, the biggest two being the scale of the UI, and some of the UI elements clashing with the style of Animal Crossing New Horizons. Finally, I asked all these people for a summary in the form of ratings. So the idea and practice, essentially what they thought of the idea in general, idea and execution, what they thought when they actually experienced and got to use the UI, color consistency, how well did it emulate the color scheme of Animal Crossing, and design consistency. Does the overall design of the UI feel at home in the game? And then finally, an overall rating, just to say, all these elements combined, what would you give it overall? And between all the results, these are the average scores. To close, I'd like to discuss what I would do if I took this prototype and developed it further into the future. Firstly, I would take on board the criticisms given to me and actively work on refining those areas, aiming to rework some buttons to better fit with the visual style of Animal Crossing New Horizons. In addition to this, I agree that some of the additions to the UI perhaps take up too much of the screen, and I would see what I could do to scale down while maintaining visual clarity and avoiding overcrowding of elements. Finally, I believe the bell inventory I could have done more with in practice. This aspect of the project I would want to revisit and repurpose into something more practical, as in the end product, at the moment it kind of feels like an afterthought that doesn't really do much functionality wise. Anyway, thank you for taking the time to hear my proposal.